Hello, everybody. It's Mike Yao with Savage Kingdoms role-playing game and Fire in the Head Productions. Today's video is about said Savage Kingdoms. It is about the most unique feature about the Savage Kingdoms tabletop role-playing game that I've never really seen in other tabletop role-playing games, and I've probably tried at least 100 in my career, 120. Yeah, I've been doing this for a while, since like 1979, 1980, kind of dating myself there. But point being is that I have tried a bunch of different games and having designed a few myself, I just kind of wanted to share the Savage Kingdoms thing. And it sounds like maybe I'm kind of bragging a little bit, and maybe I am kind of, sort of, because usually I'm like, kind of the nice guy, and I'm very neutral, and I'm kind of open to everything, which I am. But today I want to be a little more aggressive and kind of mention what I think this is one of the most unique things about SK that you may not really find in other tabletop systems. I have had one, maybe two people over the last 12 years of Savage Kingdom's existence, going back to first edition from 2012, or no, 2014, sorry, that did mention they had played some game that did what I'm about to tell you guys about, or something very similar, that I've never actually come across it yet. So it might have been a really obscure game that maybe like kind of like this one, maybe even smaller, or maybe it was never actually published or something like that. So anyway, what is that feature, you might be asking? And that is the combat system, which I'll go into in just a second. So you might think that, well, a combat system, that's like a giant pillar of a tabletop role-playing game, right? Fantasy role-playing game, Dark Ages role-playing game. Um, and Dungeons and Dragons, that's one of the three like pillars, right? That they call. There's the combat pillar, there's the exploration pillar, and there's the social pillar. Kind of the three main ones of D&D, and I don't actually disagree with that. I think it's somewhat simplistic, but breaking it down into the three primary categories of a game session, or even an entire campaign, or even just a small adventure, that's really kind of what you can break things down into when you're doing a political intrigue scene that's technically social. You could break it down into sub pillars like subterfuge and stealth, which I kind of like to sort of keep in my head a lot. And combat can be broken down into different types of combat: single combat, duels, and then mass combats and skirmishes, which is what typically most fantasy tabletop role playing games would have in an encounter. Stuff like that. Exploration could be broken out into puzzle solving, although that could be also be puzzle, but or social. But if it's puzzles that you find while exploring some ancient ruins or something like that, then that's technical exploration. Anyway, all that to say that the combat system, we'll be looking at that pillar today for Savage Kingdoms, but particularly one kind of main thing about it, which I will share right now. If you've never played Savage Kingdoms before, you might be like, why all the buzz? Why all the career? Why all the build up, Mike? This has got to be amazing. I guess it kind of is, but it is what it is. If you've played SK before, and probably you have, but all 12 people who follow this channel, probably half of them have, or some of my players, or at least have played in the past, you might know what I'm about to talk about. And the main primary thing is, so Savage Kingdoms is based on a D20. It's not a D20 system, which is the name of the game system that goes all the way back to 3.3.0, actually, of D&D. But it is a D20 system. In other words, it uses a D20 for the entire game system. You don't have to use any other dice. No D4s, no D6s, no D8s, no D10s, no D12s, no D16s, no D7s, no D30s, weirdnesses like that. Not even percentile dice or D100s. Everything runs off of a D20, and I did that on purpose as a design choice to make it less confusing for new players. And the game is faster. We're not having to worry about, oh, I did an attack roll I hit, now I have to find 68 or 2d6 plus the 2d4 for this, and that's all well and good because people do like the clackety clacks in general, but it does kind of slow the game down. And one of my design goals when I was doing Savage Game, was particularly for combat, was to make the game more. I want it to be more narrative, right? It's more of a storytelling game. I know that's like a phrase that's used in a lot of modern tabletop role playing games, and to most extents, it's true. Um, but narrative and story kind of first. But as you know, there's still a lot of crunch in SK. I mean, there's a lot of crunch for what I call a storytelling based game. And the reason that I do that is I want the crunch, the mechanics, to support all the cool stuff that we're going to be doing narratively. Um, and anyway, to bring us back to the combat thing, so that the main thing about SK combat is a single d20. So it's all d20s, like I just said. So if you're trying to make an attack roll, and that could be through brawling, if you're like punching someone or elbowing them or grappling them or throwing, doing a shoulder throw, anything that's unarmed is considered brawling, and there's a skill for that, and it's based on physique. Although there is a talent called agile brawling that you can use your agility etc. for physique, which is pretty supported by kind of real life martial arts there. And then there's the other skill that's would be probably the most used is melee weaponry. That's actually a skill. And then you have specialties and whatever: dagger, short sword, long sword, spear, great sword, great axe, battle axe, whatever it is, club, mace. And then the other skill that you normally are making an attack roll with would be range weaponry, and so that's your standard range weaponry, like your bow, your short bows, and your long bows, and your crossbows, and your slings, and thrown weapons such as daggers and javelins and stuff like that. So, whatever you're trying to do, say your character's trying to punch someone, the GM would say make a brawling skill roll or just a brawling roll, and you would roll the d20, and you're trying to compare it to the opponent's defense. In this case, we'll say the opponent's defense is a little above average, but not like ridiculous. So, defense is 13. And there's a couple different types of defenses, which I might go into in more detail later, but just right for the scope of this video, you have dodge and parry as kind of your main ones. If you have a shield, there's also something called shield defense, but really it's just your parry defense plus whatever your shield bonus is. So, it's not a big deal. We'll say this character he's trying to hit has a dodge defense of 13. A good thing about dodge defense is you can use pretty much all the time. Parry defense, you have to have something to parry with, right? Something to block with, such as a melee weapon or a shield. So we'll say in this case, it's the guy's dodge is better, or maybe he doesn't even have a weapon out and he has to dodge. And let's say it's 13. He made the brawling roll. He rolls an 18. He succeeds by 5, meaning he does 5 points of damage. Already done. It's already done. So that opponent would mark off 5 health points. In this case, it was an NPC that I would be doing it as a GM or whatever the game master, whoever it is, would be doing that. There's a couple of caveats to that. That's really fast and simple, right? Sounds awesome. There's a couple little caveats that do slow it down a little bit more. I still don't think it's slower than D&D, especially for me because I'm, created the system and I've been running it for ever. Seems like I still run a lot of D&D as well, like professionally for kids and for youth players and stuff mostly. But anyway, but I prefer SK. It's a little bit biased. It's my own game, but it's also a little grittier. It's based on the Dark Ages. I've put it all purposely into the wheelhouse of what I like and what I'm best at, as far as description and real life history and stuff goes, like that, storytelling and stuff. So yeah, the caveats to that would be, so in the case we just made up there, he hits for 5 points of damage. If the opponent's wearing any armor subtracts or absorbs damage, and that's not unusual. That's in many medieval fantasy tabletop role playing games. We're not even medieval science fiction. Anything that's dealing with body armor. Uh, I'd say 70-80% of game systems do that. D&D just does a quick armor class thing, which is fast. It's not very realistic, quote unquote. I know it's fantasy. It's kind of hard to get your mind around that. Your armor class is anyway. You know how armor class works. The good news is it is very fast, even though it doesn't really make physical sense in some cases. So yeah, and SK would be like, okay, so he's wearing hard leather armor cuirass, which is typically 2 points of armor. I say typically, that's assuming it's average quality. If it's master craft, it would be 3 points. So you subtract the 2 from the 5, and he took 3 points of damage. In the case the guy wearing hard leather armor. Let's say the guy was wearing a chainmail shirt. That's, I believe, right off the top of my head, I think 4 points of protection. So he would have only taken 1 point of damage, which kind of makes sense. The punch probably grazed much of the chainmail, maybe just caught his cheek for a point of damage. So it's very easily storytelling wise to kind of imagine, probably more so than D&D with its straight armor class, to really know what's kind of going on there. Let's give you another example. So let's say you want to attack someone with your, let's say, longsword, very popular, decent martial arts weapon, very darky, very Savage Kingdoms-y. and your melee weaponry bonus is +3, but you have a specialty in long swords, which is another +2. So in this case, you have +5 to your melee weaponry roll. You roll a 14, we'll say 19 total with the +5 bonus for the longsword against an opponent. This in this case, we'll say his defense is or her whoever their defense is 14. Wait, we'll say it's 16. So 3 points of damage, right? 19 versus 16. Caveat here again is body armor if the opponent has it, and he may not have any at all. And then there's one last little caveat, something called armor piercing. So a longsword used in one hand doesn't have any armor piercing. A two-handed, most, if not all, in Savage Kingdoms, two-handed medium weapons being wielded in two hands is armor piercing 1, gives +1 to armor piercing. So in this case, if he was wielding it, you or the attacker was wielding a longsword in two hands, would gain +1 armor piercing. And armor piercing is just a fancy name for bonus damage. That's all it is. I just call it armor piercing because it sounds cooler. And it's effectively what's happening because your armor piercing is going to the big, heavier weapons that do cleave through armor. Uh, if the opponent's not wearing body armor, it's still the same. Your flesh and bone is technically armor against your organs, so it's still, yeah. So it's not one of these things where if you're wearing armor, you do the armor piercing, and if you don't, you don't. No, it's always you add it. So it's a lot quicker and faster that way too. Let's see, a good example of armor piercing would be great axe. A great axe is armor piercing 3, and it's a heavy weapon, meaning you have to use two hands. And so that's always going to do 3 points of bonus damage. So even if you hit the person's, if you succeed exactly on their defense, which is 0, right, with the basic math there, armor piercing 3 means you're still going to do 3 points of damage. Again, possibly minus body armor. Let's see. Let's do a third example with the so range weaponry. We'll do a range weaponry one, a ranged attack. So let's say you've got a long bow and you're firing from 30 yards out at an opponent. So 30 yards out for a longbow is quite easily within short range, so there's no penalty there on the d20 die roll. We'll say let's say you rolled a 22 this time. You're +6 with your longbow. So you rolled a 16 on the die, +6, a 22. The opponent in this case against missile weapons has to use dodge. You can't parry a missile weapon. You can, however, in most cases you can't. There's a talent called parry missiles. If you have this talent, you literally can like knock arrows, and you can pull an Aragorn in Lord of the Rings and knock daggers out of the air. Very hard to do, but not certainly impossible. I've done some medieval martial arts, and I've managed to do that a few times. But it is pretty difficult, which is why it requires an actual talent. So in most cases, 95% of the time, probably, that opponent will not have dodge parries as a talent and must use dodge defense against a range attack or missile attack. So what did we say? 30 yards out, +6. You rolled a 22. The opponent's dodge defenses we'll say 15. This guy's fairly skilled. It's 10 plus your bonus in acrobatics is basically what dodge defense is. So he's got +5 in acrobatics and base 10, so that's 15. 22 versus 15 is what, 7 points of damage. With the arrow, a longbow has armor piercing 1, I believe. Actually, it might be 2. No, it's 1, just for a basic average quality longbow. So there you go, 8 points of damage already done. And if the opponent wears armor, you subtract it, done. All that's done. That is generally at 95 to 98% of the time faster than rolling all the extra dice for Dungeons and Dragons. As fun as that can be for some players, perhaps even most players. But many of my players I've noticed, which is really cool, they like dice. We all like dice. We're not most of us, but most of us are dice goblins, as they say. But my players, fortunately, are blessed, and I do play with a lot of like actors or people that are kind of around theater and acting and stuff like that, film and such. They still, even with all the cool dice that you can get from Dungeons and Dragons and other games, they still prefer Savage Kingdoms, or at least a game that just has like the one die type. It's all one sleek mechanic, and everything gets done, and then you can focus more on the narration of what's actually happening in the story instead of the game mechanics that might take 60 seconds to resolve with all the different dice. So yeah, so that's kind of good to know. So that's not for everyone. If you really are more of a beer and pretzels type of player, more of a casual player, and you're not super deep in the story, you're just kind of there to hang out and roll some cool dice. SK may not be quite as much for you, although I have seen those type of players really kind of connect to it. So SK, particularly in the combat, is really going to be more for your medieval enthusiasts or dark age enthusiasts or sword and sorcery enthusiasts, and even just people that are just really kind of a little bit more into storytelling, and just kind of want to get, like I said, the quick action resolution done, and on with the story. So yeah, so SK combats typically are shorter than D&D, not always. I would say if there's any flaw to the SK combat system at all, is that when defenses can, if somebody has a really high defense and a lot of body armor, as you can probably already formulate in your head mathematically, let's say you have a parry defense of like 17, which means you have +7 in melee weaponry, because the formula for melee or for parry defense is 10 plus your total melee weaponry modifier. You only add the weapon specialty if you have a talent called weapon specialist, I think, or parry specialist. That's what it's called. Otherwise, you're just using your base skill and not a specialty. So we'll say 17. You're wearing a full hauberk, chainmail hauberk, or scale mail. And let's see, we'll just say chainmail. And then a war helm, which is another point. So that right there, 1 point from your helmet, from a full war helm, and then 5 points from a chainmail hauberk. You don't know what a hauberk it is the fuller suit that kind of goes down to your knees, and usually it's cut up in the middle so you can move. Um, think more Dark Ages hauberk. Don't think like the leggings, almost kind of silly chainmail leggings that came more in like the High Middle Ages. We're talking Dark Ages, so we're talking hauberks and cool stuff like that, right? Corselets and cuirasses. Um, so anyway, so that would be 6 points of armor, right? And so 6 plus 17, that's well, let's break it down. So 17 parry, and then 6 armor. And so the reason you can combine those two to 23, right? So 23 would be the number in this case. So you can see what I'm talking about. Like, so somebody's got 17 parry, 6 armor, and that's 23 total, basically. And the reason I say basically, I'll share in a minute. So you remember, so you got to roll over that to score any damage at all. Cool. The saving grace to SK though, which is a mechanic that everybody really loves. I think they like it more than I do. I like the mechanic. Okay, I kind of prefer my game mechanics of Red Sun a little bit better but people seem to like the SK one a good bit better. Then that is if you roll a natural 20, it explodes, meaning that you roll again and add that result to the original result. So that's the way you can kind of get away to score more damage against those high defense or even low defense. If you're scoring, you end up exploding a 20 and end up with a total of 32 against somebody with a defense of 12. That's 20 points of damage, assuming your weapon can do that. Because that's another caveat that I almost forgot. Every weapon type has a maximum damage. So what was the first example? Brawling, right? So punching, maximum damage from kicking or punching or elbowing or headbutting, anything that's brawling is 5 points. However, there's a talent called Heavy Hitter, which increases your base damage to 8. There's another one called Martial Artist, and that one increases it to 10. And then you get some other cool things depending on your martial arts style that you go into, like the Path of the Dragon, Path of the Scorpion, Path of the Crane, etc., stuff like that, which is really cool. And most of the stuff is kind of Eastern, as you can imagine, flavor wise, but there's a few ways you can pick it up in kind of like a Western style culture. Um, yeah, so that's the other caveat. So basically, roll the die, the difference between defense and your attack. That's your base damage. You already got that figured out. And then there's a few other things that would have to consider: body armor, is it armor piercing, and maximum damage of weapon, and that's done. So as you can see, like with those few little factors, and you're new to SK and used to D&D, it actually may not be any faster than D&D with all the extra dice and all the addition and stuff like that. However, once you get used to SK, it's considerably faster than Dungeons and Dragons. And I just want to put this out there. I know a lot of YouTubers are like, "Oh, it's faster and faster and it's sleeker," and that's great. And I know where they're coming from. But I just want to put that out there that faster isn't necessarily always better, right? Because we're here for a reason. We're playing a 4 hour session, 3 hour, 5 hour, because we enjoy it and we want to savor the time, right? So faster, in other words, speeding through scenes, whether they're combat or social or exploration or whatever, isn't necessarily the goal, right? So I think when people say faster, they're probably meaning like more fluid, more movement, less boredom, people getting bored around the table. I do see running Dungeons and Dragons and Savage Kingdoms because I run both fairly often. Um, I do see people less bored at the SK table than the D&D table, and that's not because D&D is terrible. I mean, it's the great, it's the oldest system around. It's still great and very engaging. However, as we know, there's some flaws with the game, as there are in all games, including SK. Uh, and one of them, I think, is that rounds take a little long in D&D. I think we all kind of know that at this point, particularly at mid to high level characters. Just so much going on, and people kind of dial out. The only way you can kind of dial in when it's not your turn is reactions and stuff like that. In SK, it's pretty similar. You can only really react on your turn as a reaction or anything that's role playing. Obviously, we want you to speak, and do cool stuff when it's not your turn. But as far as hard action mechanics, it has to be on your turn or reaction in SK. But the difference is I think what I'm getting at is the SK combat being, particularly in combat, being so much more cyclic or very fast. There's that term again. And I guess again by fast I mean like fluid and circular, and just like it's your turn is going, and then you do some cool stuff, and then you're off to the next person's, and then before you know it, your turn's back around. And interestingly enough, I'm going to make a video about this particular thing in general. So when I was developing my other role playing game, Red Sun, I developed as a 3 action system, and I liked it so well, and all the playtesters liked it so well. I'm like, you know what? On the new edition of SK, if I ever do another new edition of Savage Kingdoms, which now it looks like I am, 4th edition, I'm going to use the 3 action system that I do use for Red Sun with some tweaks, because Red Sun is a D8 dice pool game system, and this is a D20 exploding. Like I said, so totally different game systems, but the general idea of 3 actions is still there. So you would think that with a 3 action system, SK combat or any action scene that's kind of like combat would be slower because you've got 3 actions. But here's the thing, like and most D&D players have figured this out, unless you're new to the game. It's really the same in D&D. You have an action, you have a move, so that's technically 2 actions. And then most people have a bonus action. Um, so that's 3 actions right there. And then there's like the free item manipulation action. So technically that's the 4th action. So really, if you really think about it, SK actually has, it's more focused. There's actually, I guess, less actions, but it's more freer. So it's incorporating all of that. So you could use all 3 actions to move if you want. You could use 2 of the actions to move and then do something else like attack or hide. You could do 1 move action and then 2 actions to hide and then attack, trying to get an opponent off guard, perhaps. It takes 2 actions to cast a spell in combat. So anyway, I don't want to go too much because this video wasn't really about the 3 action system, but since it has to do with combat, particularly or action scene that's similar to combat, the 3 action system is there. So I just thought I would kind of mention it. But the point of me originally mixing it was that mentioning it is that it's not, even though it's a 3 action system, it's actually not slower. It's actually faster. And then given the cyclical nature of just the single D20, SK combat moves pretty fast and fluid. So anyway, that's the little secret of the SK system that I'm very proud of. I think almost everyone that's played it just are like, oh my god, this is, why didn't anybody else come up with this? Which I agree. They're probably saying, why didn't some more clever designers or more known, well-known designers come up with it? And I'm sure in playtesting, there's many game designers that came up with the system. I will be honest, before ending this video, if there's any like I've come across this myself, so I'm thinking some other playtesters may have, or game designers have probably come across this. Like, I mean, right? It's not like it's that big of a deal to figure out, and they probably thought, and I've thought this before, that people like to roll damage dice after the hit, and that is largely true. But I've also found that a lot of people just want to get on with the story, regardless of the mechanic, or they want a sleeker mechanic like what I think this is. But another thing is also, I think that if there's any flaw to it at all, I think I already shared it. Like if defenses get really high and the opponent's attack bonuses aren't that, it can be a little bit of a slog back and forth. But the only reason that I still hold to that is because, and I'm a bit, this game is simulation light, by the way. It's considered a sim light game. So in real actual Dark Ages and medieval combat, there were a lot of, if the opponents were equally matched, especially if they were at least medium to heavy armor, it was a bit of a uh, nickeling and diming each other a little bit, glances off of armor, shield glances. A solid blow, even against like, it's gonna mess you up pretty badly unless your armor is really good and the weapon you were hit with was very light or something. Um, until finally that kind of one big hit comes in, or you get worn down enough. And that one big hit coming in can be that exploding 20 design that we have in the system, or being nickel and dime could be like we just talked about, those 2 or 3 points of damage that you might hit every so often that just kind of add up. When you get to half your health, you're staggered after all. So there is an effect for whittling an opponent down to half his or her health, the same as stamina. So when you get to half health, you are, what do I call it? Staggered. When you get to half stamina, you are fatigued. They both have the same effect, -2 to all your die rolls and ability. But the reason they're two different conditions is because there are different ways to get to that condition. Anyway, I think that's all. I thought this video was going to be a little bit shorter, but I feel like it had a lot of content, and hopefully you guys kind of understand the gist of the Savage Kingdoms combat system, that which you will see again in 4th edition, even more cleaned up and even faster and spiffier. And then you get to add all the, there's, if you have battle talents, there's all the different maneuvers you can do that are really cool to add on to that basic system that I was just talking about. So anyway, thanks for hanging in there this long, if you've stayed here this long, and I will talk to you guys again soon. Thanks.